Hello, and welcome to Yogahub podcast, where we bring you conversations with some of the world's leading yoga and movement educators. In this conversation, I'm talking to Carrie Owerko. Carrie is a movement optimist. She has a background in theatre, dance, as well as Iyengar yoga, and she's been travelling the world teaching for the last 30 years. Carrie's approach emphasises the importance of play and how we can expand our capabilities, not just physically, but also in terms of what we feel we may be capable of doing. Carrie has come to us for a series of workshops here at Yogahub Dublin, the 5th to the 7th of April. It'll be her first time teaching in Ireland, and we're super excited to host her for what we're sure is going to be a fun, creative, and enlightening weekend. You can find out more at yogahub.ie/workshops. Thank you very much for listening. Here's my chat with Carrie. First of all, thank you very, very much for taking the time out of your day to have this conversation. I must admit, I am only recently getting to know you and your work and the things that you offer. Your name was passed on to us by someone who works at our studio, saying that we really have to get this lady over if possible. And since then, I've been following you on social media and doing a little bit of research into you and your background. And I have to say, you're like incredibly inspiring, a breath of fresh air. And it genuinely is an honor to be able to get the chance to have this conversation with you. I always like to start with what I consider to be the most important question, which is, how are you doing today?
Oh, wow. Thanks for asking. Today, I'm doing pretty well. Better than yesterday because the sun came out in New York City. It's really cold and windy, but the sun is out. And that makes a big difference. I know over in Ireland, you guys probably have a little more cloudy days than we do. But it felt like a long winter, even though it wasn't a bad one. So I'm looking forward to spring. I'm looking forward to coming to Europe. I'll be in Paris before Dublin. And just sort of looking forward to that shift in energy and moving towards my favorite time of the year, which is spring and summer. So
great. Well, we're honored to have you here. And I think, would I be right in saying this is going to be your first time coming to teach in Ireland?
Yes. I've taught in the UK, but my first time in Ireland, and I've always wanted to go to Ireland. So for me, it's really exciting. And so I love to travel. I did a lot of travel pre-pandemic. And probably too much, I think. I was all over the world all the time. And it was, when you start, that was my life then, workshops and things. And so I would book, up to 2 years in advance. And then I realized, I don't know if I really want to do that, but it was already like set. And then the pandemic happened. I was in Australia teaching when the pandemic happened, and it forced a change. And I had to move my business online, and it ended up being, I love teaching in person and I love workshops, and I do enjoy travel tremendously. But I also have rediscovered my life in New York and passions, things that I love. And we have a dog now. So it's interesting, those shifts. And so trying to find that balance, traveling, sharing, going to different places, because it's, I think, really good to get out of your, usual environment, is important for us. At least it is for me. And, but at the same time, the relationships, the depth of study that I have here and pursuing my interests. It was hard when I was traveling. I had to do everything. I became an online student of topics that I'm interested in, which I think has helped me be a better online teacher. But at the same time, I love people and I like social interaction. It's very meaningful for me. So, that there's just nothing like being in the room with other people.
Yeah, but it's interesting because I think it was a similar experience for a lot of people. Obviously, COVID and all of the things that came with it was a very challenging time in a lot of ways. But for those of us that were, I guess, lucky enough, the opportunity it afforded to slow down, to reset in a lot of ways. And I guess in one way through necessity, but then also through opportunity to be able to reevaluate what it is that we want to be doing and how we want to be doing it. And I think although I think for a lot of us who've maybe slipped back on the kind of hamster wheel of busy, it was also a good time to, like I said, sort of reassess, like, do I actually want to be doing so much? Do I need to be doing so much? And what could I do if I actually afforded myself a little bit more time? So, with all the not so good things that came from COVID and the pandemic and all that sort of stuff, there was some benefits from it as well for those of us that were lucky enough to get the chance to receive those benefits.
Oh, 100%. I remember feeling pretty terrified actually at the beginning of the pandemic. Like, what? It just felt like this rug just ripped out from beneath me. And my husband as well. Like, it was scary. It was a really scary time. And New York was like the epicenter of it after obviously China, but like, I came back and New York was in lockdown, and I don't think other cities were at that point. Although Italy, I think there had been, I can't remember, but I think that maybe Italy was before the city. And I remember being really terrified. And that's when, but prior to that, when I had been traveling so much, I was actually beginning to develop I wanted to have this online on-demand platform. I thought, oh, this is a way for me to cut back. This is a way for me to reprioritize. And I was working with someone developing it, and it was just taking so long. Like everything was taking so long, and this had to be right, and this had to be right. And then I remember calling him from Los Angeles. I'd flown from Brisbane to LA, and I stayed the night in an airport hotel before I flew to New York. And I remember calling my partner in the project, my web designer, and all around helper with all things technology. And I was like, okay, this has to happen now. Like, we just have to do it and let it be imperfect, because nothing's perfect. Like, I believe in messes. I really do. I think that they're a creative space, and it gives everybody permission just to dive in and experiment and explore and just put it out there as it is, and then improve things as we go along. We'll learn by doing. We can't get everything. Like if you think you get it right, you don't. You know what I mean? Because you can't possibly know what the thing is until you're in the thing. And so it ended up being terrifying in the beginning, but also just, again, like you said, a great opportunity to re-examine things like, what is important in a practice anyway. I remember being so interested in I had already been interested in neurology, but so much more so at the onset of the pandemic, just realizing how my nervous system benefited from going out and looking out over the Hudson River at the horizon and just letting that sort of panoramic vision, because it'd just been so tunneled for so long. And also just things like how I was moving in space. Dance became so much more important to me because I felt like I needed to or wanted to feel my body moving in space challenges to my vestibular system that I just hadn't been. I don't know what it was, but it just I felt so attracted to moving in different ways, to rolling around on the floor and giving myself a novel stimulus, something that I feel like I'd just been in this track and yoga, presenting at workshops, those things, that there was less, even though I always considered myself playful and exploratory, there was much less of that. Then the pandemic created a creative space. It sounds crazy, but the constraint, if we will, the constraints imposed by the pandemic afforded new ideas and approaches, and like you said, reprioritizing, what is, asking those questions. What do I want? How do I want to move? And what is it about the practice that is nourishing me now? Because it's a different world. It literally felt like a different world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like COVID and the pandemic created a shift in terms of not just how you work, but also in terms of how you approach your practice. So it could actually be a nice opportunity for you to maybe share a little for anybody who isn't familiar with your background and your journey to get to the point where you are now. And I guess maybe to touch upon how this, relatively recent period with the pandemic and stuff created that shift for you in your approach.
Yeah, I many decades ago, many years ago, I was involved in theater, in movement theater, and came to New York to study. I grew up out west in the American West, Southwest, and I studied theater and worked in theater in New York City in movement theater, specifically with a company. That's where we did the work in the prisons and in schools, and traveled, did some interesting work for probably 10 years or more with that group before I decided to go back to school and study Laban movement analysis. I was really interested in diving more into the movement end of things. I'd been in musical theater and done all of that, but I was just so interested in what the body, just in like, I guess if you want to use this analogy of like, dance to me isn't about the steps, and yoga isn't really about the poses. I love asana, but it just isn't about that. It's like with dance, it's like, what are you saying with the steps? Like, what is it that's being expressed or communicated? And the same thing I feel, for me anyway, with asana. Although it can be so multi-dimensional, multifaceted, the practice. But I went back to study movement analysis because I just was interested in diving more deeply into somatic practices. And I just wanted to be a student again, because I think at the end of the day, I really love being a student. It's like my favorite thing is being a student. And so it gave me an opportunity to do that. And then after I got out of school, or actually it was when I was in school, I started a yoga practice. I'd kind of been inspired by some things that we'd been doing in my theater company. I'd been doing a little bit of yoga at the Jivamukti Center down in the East Village of New York. So when it was there was very little yoga in New York in those days. There were like a few places. It was such a different time, now there's a yoga studio on every block, or there was before the pandemic, and then a lot of them closed. But I did some yoga, went to some classes, but I really wanted a practice. And that's when I started studying Iyengar yoga, and I kind of fell in deep with it. I think I was transitioning out of this theater company. I'd been going to school, and that time, it's so contextual, I think. Like at that time in my life, and I'd been doing a lot of contact improvisation. I don't know if you know anything about that dance form, but this was like the 90s. It was just such a different scene. And then I came to Iyengar yoga, and it was all this structure, and like, I was actually really attracted to that. I thought, because I've been studying movement analysis, so I was like, belts and structure, and there was a clarity and a precision to the practice that at that time I was attracted to, and I just fell in deep with it and stayed for a very long time and learned a lot. But then I think at some point, and traveling to India many times to be with the Iyengars, I bumped up against, there was my idealized perception, how you construct reality, and what it was like, or at least maybe it wasn't what I had thought it was. And in going to India and studying with Iyengars, I was faced with these people who were wonderful in many ways and highly the shared incredible knowledge, but also I didn't share all of those values. And I was struggling with who I was, and like, could I be like that. And I didn't really want to be like that. And I would come back to New York and teach like that. And I would see the reaction on my students' faces, which was, when are you coming back? Like, it's that thing where you get very inspired by a teacher and they light a fire. And for reasons probably, unknown to us, like what was it in that interaction that ignited a passion or an interest or something? And that's really important, but it's so multifactorial and it doesn't always translate into, okay, I'm going to be like that teacher was. And that isn't the thing. Like, I think the Iyengars, for all their, and I don't know how much you know about Iyengar yoga or BKS Iyengar or Gita Iyengar or Prashant Iyengar, but they're tough. They were, that's the Gita and BKS Iyengar have passed now, but it's just a very different pedagogical system and way of communicating. And I think authentic to them, but not to me. And so I was inauthentic, when I would come back and try to channel Gita, it just didn't work. So, but more than that, I think it's like in the process of going deep into something, which I think is really important to do. I realized or came to realize or long for things that I had missed. Like I missed play tremendously. And I think Iyengar yoga does. I know a lot of people would disagree with me, but I think there are elements of play in Iyengar yoga. I really do, because BKS Iyengar was extremely creative person. Like he was always experimenting and trying things and all this. So I learned that from him, from watching how much he tried things. The what ifs that he asked all the time. He was constantly experimenting. And when something didn't work out, it wasn't the end of the world. Like he just would be like, okay, like, because it was a big experiment for him. So I feel like that was an inspiration, but I missed, and I tried to embody that in my own practice. But Iyengar yoga is very, it's very hierarchical, and there are a lot of exams and like what you can do. Well, there's a lot of no. And my theater background was a lot of yes and. It was improvisation and play and exploration, and I was missing that. I felt like as a learner, yes and is the open door. Play is the best way to learn as a child, as an adult, as a dog. I have a puppy, and, like they learn through play. We are animals, and we too learn through play. Our brain is shaped through play. And that piece of it was like play, it needs to be afforded to all participants, not a few, select few, So I remember a teacher saying something like, why do we have to worry about like, what is this thing with creativity? Because has already come up with everything. So he's done it for us. And I just remember thinking, first of all, that's so sad, that, okay, you don't need to explore anymore because he already did it. Not okay with me, because the exploration is what the point is. And then also creativity is, I feel, is an expression of, if there is divinity, and I don't know, but to me, it would be the closest thing to that. As humans, this thing, we write stories, we make music, we create dance, we have narrative. Stories give meaning to something that's like chaotic, honestly. It's uncomprehensible. And our ability to tell stories and to create narrative, right? We create that is, makes us human. And it is something, I think, incredibly wonderful and something important to stay close to and something to nurture in as teachers, to encourage participants to be that, to allow that from within themselves, to ask, what if I try it like this? the teacher didn't tell me to try the pose like this, but what if I do? I think that's really empowering and important. And I don't think it's about, we have to worry about like safety. I think all of that has maybe we've like the culture shifted quite far to like, let's keep everyone safe. And of course, we don't want people doing crazy things. But that is something I learned when I worked in the correctional facilities was we didn't talk a lot about safety, because it wasn't really like, the reality is it's not a safe space, like completely safe. That's just not what the world is. And so you do the best you can with your nervous system and how you're treating others and an awareness of your environment and what we can to kind of de-escalate within ourselves. But to operate under this illusion that it's a completely safe world is maybe not fair, because our nervous system is like, I don't think so. Like the brain is like, I'm here to keep you safe. So, you can believe that story if you want. But so it's interesting that I think play is a way that we confront that. Play is a way that we exercise behavioral options. We risk a little bit. There's risk is involved in play and risk is involved in life. And play is a lower stakes way to start to test the waters, so that we have more information, that our brain has more information about, what it can predict in the world. And so, I feel like that was the thing in my practice that sort of shifted me. One of the things, there were many things, but before, there was all the discussion about abuse and everything that came out in both the Ashtanga world and Iyengar world, I was already like moving in a different direction. And that the other piece of it was always something that I struggled with, I have to say. I would just move away. Like there were classes in India that I wouldn't go to because I knew what that environment was. I knew what went down in the room. Do you know what I mean? So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to put myself there because I won't be able to tolerate it. Like there will be some part of me that will walk out, and I'd like to stay here a little bit longer, learn a little more. I mean, it's weird to talk about it like that, but that was it. It was a group community. There were people I loved. There was information that I was interested in gleaning, and yet the context in which one received the information was sometimes too much for me. I know not everybody felt like that way, but yeah. Kind of a long ramble.
Yeah, there was, a little bit to unpack there, but honestly, it was lovely hearing you speak, or very, very interesting hearing you speak about those things. And I think you touched upon a lot of things, both, I guess, historically and also philosophically, in terms of how practice potentially evolves. And I guess one thing I'd like to ask you now, which is maybe a very simplistic thing, or very maybe maybe a very simple thing in a lot of ways, and you've maybe touched on it in part as well, but how would you define play?
Oh, that's such a good question, because play is so, it's such a big idea, right? But if I go back to the definition I gave you a little bit earlier, is that it is, for me, that it's a really succinct sentence to describe it, is that it's a low stakes way. So it's not life or death, because that's not play. When the soccer game, which is a game, which is play, right? Sports is play, theater is play. Play is a part of our lives in so many ways, but we all know when the line gets crossed and it's not play anymore, right? So play is low stakes. So our nervous system will be, let me go back to the simple definition. Low stakes way to explore options, to explore our world, to learn about our world and ourselves. It's a low stakes way because we have so many different, or there are potentially many different paths, behaviorally, perspectives that we could take on an idea. Like if we just like take a pose, for example, right? And also, no, there's so many ways to approach it. There's so many ways to do it. Well, how are you going to exercise those different ways? You're going to play. You're going to try. You're going to do it. And you're going to, realize, oh, if it hurts, or it's like not working out, like I don't have to keep going with that idea. It's not a performance. Play is not a performance. It doesn't really have, and I know this is weird because I do think evolutionarily, not that there's some designer and there's some plan, but there may be, again, I don't know, but play is how developmentally we become who we are. We play as children. It's just, that's how we learn to move. Nobody teaches us. We just start exploring our environment and playing with it, interacting and playing. And animals do it. Like I mentioned earlier, we have this puppy and, she's like a year old now, but it's just all play. Like everything's a game. And the way that other mammals understand that, like other humans will understand if you're playing, because we're giving off behavior, the way that our expressions, our posture, our tone of voice. These are all ways that we communicate to another being that it's low stakes. I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here to play fight with you. Do you know, this isn't high stakes. Nobody's going to get hurt here. And if we cross the line, we'll know and we'll back down because the game's over when you cross the line. It's not, you've crossed the line. It's not play anymore. We all discovered that on the playground as kids, didn't we? We were learning. We're on the playground and, everybody's like learning about each other and relationships and society and the world, how governments work on the playground. And then somebody does something, right? And everyone's like, ooh, and game's over. And then you have to take a time out, or whatever the thing is. So, it's not, that goes back to this idea of, does it have a purpose? So one of the definitions, because I do like some research on what play is, from some writing that I'm doing, and is that it's not that it doesn't have a purpose, because evolutionarily one could say that it does. But it's not, the point is not to get to have a goal. The point is to engage in the activity. You play a game, and some of the benefits are you learn things. It's fun. You're interacting with an object. If it's like object play, because it might not be with another person. You might be playing by yourself with a Rubik's Cube or something like that. I don't know, but there's this intrinsic reward in just doing the thing, which I think is like yoga in a lot of ways. It's intrinsically rewarding. We're not getting somewhere. Like some might say, yes, there's this ultimate goal, but I never felt in my yoga practice that I was practicing for enlightenment. I just wanted to be and experience. It's kind of a sense of integration and a space where it was all welcome and it was all okay. And I think play is like a space where we're doing something for its own sake, for its own sake. The means is the end. And that is an incredibly powerful thing, because at the end of the day, maybe people are like we watched the Oscars last night, right? It's the Academy Awards. So maybe these actors are sitting around in the deathbed and staring at their statue. I don't know if maybe they are, they could be, but I would imagine that you're remembering what you loved about making movies and acting. You know what I mean? And like whatever that is that calls people to do that ultimate, like this incredible form of play, right? Isn't the statue that you get from some group of people, that decided, oh, let's give that person the statue this year. This object, it's the experience. Like, what do you remember? And play is, to me, it's just this way we learn. It's something we do for its own sake. It's an opportunity to explore options. It's, if I go back to like what I really love is learning things. I love learning things, and play is my favorite way to learn things. I mean, if I have something challenging to do, if I can switch it around as soon as I say, how might I play with this? That completely changes my mindset. From like accomplishment, goal orientation. Oh, I'm not up for the task, that kind of thing. Can I or can't I? I stop measuring myself up against the activity, and can gets replaced with might, how might I? Rather than how can I, like, can I do this or not? Of course you can, but how might you? Because then it's like, whoa, there's so many ways that this might happen, which is like a huge yes, instead of there being, giving myself that. It's like, I think it's like, okay, we don't have a cure for cancer yet, but if I were a researcher, I would want to live as if I'm exploring the way. It just hasn't been discovered yet. Not, can we? Of course we can. We just haven't gotten there yet, So it's like, but how are we going to do it? We're going to keep engaging relentlessly, because it's intrinsically rewarding to be involved. And that's what play is. Play is like, for me, it's like a Tao. I mean, it's a really big idea. It's a philosophy. It's a way of living.
Yeah. And I guess one thing that you said there was you didn't necessarily practice for enlightenment, but that the practice allowed you to just be. And I guess that's what some people would call enlightenment. But one thing that I'd be kind of interested in hearing you speak about is, so obviously as an educator, I know you love to be a student, but you are also an educator at the same time. I guess for me, one of the, I could say, challenges in certain ways when it comes to education, I guess, is the balance between structure and creativity. Not that they have to be like dichotomies, but I think some people really, really take to yoga because obviously it's such a, it's not a one size fits all sort of term, but a lot of people are drawn to certain types of yoga for structure and specific organization. And I guess it gives you lines to work within. And then maybe other people are drawn towards something like dance or theater, where obviously there could be structure in those settings as well, but it maybe has the, I don't know, the expectation of being a little bit more free or creative or like outside the lines in some senses. So someone with a bit of a background in both something structured, something that's maybe more open to creativity. As an educator, how do you balance those two things to encourage people to play, but still giving them something, I guess, some kind of structure to work within, which a lot of people benefit from?
Yeah, I think that's where, can seem paradoxical, but actually pretty much every good game has rules. Like or one could describe it some other way, but like rules, like there's rules, to different sporting games. Like there is an innate structure to a good game. And like, if like we just look at an example like theater improvisation, there were rules, like you didn't say no in a scene because you knew as soon as that happened, like that just stopped the action. That was a way that as a performer or as a participant, you're trying to control this thing that is basically you don't want to control. Like it's outside of one person's purview to monopolize or control. So there was always a spirit of like, yes, and like you would take that offer and then you could add to it, subtract, transform in some way. You would have very specific focuses, a point of concentration. And that point of concentration actually allows the freedom. I think that the interesting thing about or we could go with the idea, kind of it's more common in some approaches to movement, in movement science, and particularly like in sports, athletics, this idea of constraints and affordances. So a constraint, is, maybe we're saying the constraint is you have to keep, like, let's say you're doing a roll, let's say you're rolling on the floor. Okay. Let's say you're going from Shalabhasana, let's get specific here, to Ardha Navasana. Okay. I don't know if you guys use the Sanskrit terms there in Dublin, but I think, do you know what I mean? Ardha Navasana, like that low boat to like low locust or something. So you're going to roll on your mat from Shalabhasana to Ardha Navasana. And the constraint might be you have to keep all of your peripheral distal endpoints off the floor. Like no touching the floor. Okay. Now somebody might touch the floor and it's not like you're out, it's just that you're attempting to have that constraint or hold a block in your hands and between your feet. That's the constraint. And what that constraint does is it affords a new movement option that you might not have ever exercised or tried if you hadn't been given that constraint, because the body will do what it's done before. It will bend where it bends easily, right? And it's not necessarily we're not necessarily going to express movement in areas that we don't habitually express movement in. It's very energy efficient, right? So if you don't move, you don't move it, you lose it, but it's kind of true. The body's just always conserving energy. It's expensive to maintain certain tissues, metabolically. So the structure is such, and that's a playful thing. Like it's fun. It's like, well, some might not think so, but can be, or like you're in warrior. I'm just randomly grabbing examples out of the air, but like, let's say you were doing warrior 3. Okay. Warrior 3. And your supporting leg, you're keeping the knee a little bit soft. So you're not like asking for a super straight leg. And we wanted to explore things like tempo, because varying the tempo is a really interesting thing for the nervous system. It's important in life. Sometimes life asks us to move quickly and agilely or stop, like we're deceleration to a stop. And these are very important things as we age, that we exercise power, strength with velocity, that we work on strength, that we work on balance, that we work on bounciness, things that we might like stop doing because we're getting older. And actually that's the very thing that maybe we need to prioritize a little bit more of. So let's say we're doing the warrior 3 and we're going to challenge our balance. And this is challenging the whole balance system, proprioceptive, vestibular, visual, eye hand, you have a yoga block and you toss it up and then on the way down, you try to catch it. So while you're in your soft knee warrior 3, it's kind of challenging, like it can be. So that is a game. It has a structure. There are, like we're saying, the game is you're going to catch this block. Gravity, like, whatever, like X meters per second squared, right? That block is falling at a certain rate. The mass of the block is falling at a certain rate. And then you're going to have to move your mass at a certain rate in order to catch it. Now, you're not consciously thinking of all these things, but you're like, I got to catch the block. That's your goal. That's your focus. And if you don't catch it, okay, it's a foam block. It bounces on the floor. It's not the end of the world. You might like lose your balance a little bit and have to like recover. That's a good thing. We're learning how to recover our balance unexpectedly. So it's a game. There is a structure. Now, I also like to tell people what to do, and I like to be told what to do. To be honest with you, I appreciate instruction. I'm all for it. I'm like, tell me what to do. But I also really appreciate it when those instructions are coming in a way where it's less about, well, if a teacher's telling me to do something a specific way, I understand that that's one option, but it's not the only option. And that maybe within that context, there's like, okay, well, now let's explore turning the foot a little bit this way or this way, because it might be that option is something that you could add to your movement repertoire, that your nervous system might be like, oh, I didn't realize I could go that way. Now I know I could go that way. Oh, that's great. We have another option. Or it could be, you know what, like that angle, just my body, the shape of my bones or whatever. Like, it's just not, that's not the pocket for me, you know? And I think that if we as educators are sharing the beauty of a constraint, the fun of a constraint, and what the options, that it's like the pandemic was constraint and it afforded us a new perspective. So the structure to me is that we're giving an option that maybe certain people had never experienced before. And within that, we also leave a little room so that the participant can tinker within that margin, you know, that there's some tinkering involved. There's some exploration. There's some questions, like, you know, so that they're also kind of having that experience. Like, what does it feel like when you do this? What does it feel like when you do that? So that then, oh, when I do the back bend and I turn my feet out, oh, my pelvis went higher, you know, things like that they might be like, oh, but I thought I had to do this because some bad thing would happen. I really try to stay away from that kind of thing where if I'm giving a constraint, instruction, okay, let's just say, to do something a certain way, that I used to do this. I did used to do it. I don't do it anymore. But that I don't lay on to that some sort of nocebo or an idea that if you do it this other way, something bad could happen, because I don't really know that. I don't think that anybody knows it. And B, that sets someone up potentially for a pain experience, do you know, creating fear in a nervous system, which I just don't think that's my role as an educator. In fact, if there's anything, because people are going to have fear, like I'm afraid a lot. I'm in class, like I get afraid, I get nervous, you know, I get like, oh, you know, like what's going to happen? I don't know. But there's something that pulls me into that experience. And I think that as an educator, and that gets transmitted to the student, that our job is to put people at ease. I think one of our jobs is to put people at ease so that they better learn how to put themselves at ease in stressful situations, because life is stressful and a lot of the fun things in life are stressful. You know, it's not like stress isn't bad, it's just what it is. And that we learn through practice ways, strategies, and through play to help ourselves move into the unknown, to help ourselves move into the unknown, because the unknown, of course, our nervous system would be like, well, you didn't do that before and you don't know, you might die. You know, right? So I don't want to be the teacher that's like, if you do this, you'll die, you know, because so that's, I think, how I manage that. I've never been one who really responded well to the idea of it's like a space that is both bounded and open. It's both. You know, there are boundaries, there are rules, if you will, but it's also open. And we realize that the rules are there to help guide the exploration, and that, yes, they can be broken. You know what I mean? It's not like, but it's just something that we collectively agree to, like we do in society all the time, right? We're going to collectively agree to do these things because we know it's going to be better for all of us if we can agree that these are things that we do and these are things that we don't do. And someone will come along and challenge some of those rules, and sometimes they need to be challenged. Do you know, like sometimes there were certain rules that needed to be challenged, that needed to be broken. And that's the beauty of it, is that we're evolving together. We're learning together. And the classroom, I think, or yoga studio, the dance studio, is a really beautiful place to just explore all these things, you know? And at least that's what I love about being in a room, either teaching or as a student, is that it's just this environment for learning. And when I say learning, I don't just mean acquiring information, but an experience that is enriching my life, in ways that transfer outside of that room. That the skills that I learn inside the room transfer to other areas of my life.
And that's, I think, in so many ways, the end goal with a practice such as yoga, that it's not something that is just limited to the time that you spend on your mat, or maybe in your case, not on the mat so much. And then how does that, how can that actually inform when you're in a stressful situation, when there is something that you need to respond to in a mindful way? And there's a few little things I'd like to ask you, just based on the few things you were saying there. Something that's always stuck with me is, I remember being told before that in terms of education, learning from somebody, that you will often learn more, or you're picking up more so from the energy of the teacher as much as what it is that they're actually saying. It's how are they saying what they're saying, as much as just the actual data, for want of a better word. And one thing I'd like to ask you, so first of all, for anyone who isn't familiar with that term that you use, nocebo, how would you personally define that? And then I guess you, in a sense, would see yourself as almost opposite that, as I've heard you describe yourself as a movement optimist, and you don't want to be the person that says, if you do it this way, you're gonna kill yourself. And is that something that just came naturally to you, or was it something that you had to? Because I think in some ways, for people who are new to teaching, almost your worst fear is somebody getting hurt in your class. So you might tend a little bit more towards the don't put your knee past your ankle, or make sure you're. So was the approach as a movement optimist, did that just come naturally to you, or was it something that you had to very specifically lean into? And do you still have that little part of yourself, I guess, that wants to be more cautious, but you consciously take the decision to approach it a different way?
Yeah, I think that, no, it didn't come naturally. I think it was something I learned. I remember when I started taking, so as I kind of moved myself out of being kind of exclusively in the Iyengar world, and it was a process, it's definitely not like a black and white thing. And I started taking different courses, sometimes from yoga teachers, but often from movement science oriented courses. So I had been studying with, I'd done some, dissections, cadaver labs, and that was pretty mind blowing, because I'm like, oh wait, everything, it's like not what I thought, even though I'd studied anatomy books forever, then cadaver lab was like, what? It's not like the anatomy book at all. It's so mind blowing. And taking different movement science courses, often from sports physios or physiotherapists that work with dancers. And there were ideas from the people that I was attracted to studying with, as a one of the yoga teachers that I went to one of her courses. I was teaching down in Australia, and she happened to be teaching a course. And so I remember I went to Australia. I was going to be there teaching for like a month, and I just left 5 days early so I could go do this course with Jules Mitchell. And I don't know if you know Jules, but she's great. And through Jules, and also just research that I'd done, I did a course with Greg Lehman, who I'm a huge fan of, and he's the person who uses that term movement. He has a great podcast called Movement Optimism. He's just amazing. Critical thinker, amazing physio, and just, his mind and his questioning and his inquiry and his understanding of the scientific literature, is staying on top of it. And I think that really, there were ideas. So nocebo, if we want to go back to defining, I think many of us are familiar with the idea of a placebo. So, some inert thing, a sugar pill or whatever, but if it might elicit, through belief or mechanism still understood to us, a positive response in a system. And so nocebo would be the opposite. So if someone says, if you move your knee, you know, to the inner foot or to the outer foot, you can damage your knee. Well, your knee moves like that a lot in life. And, but if we implant that idea, because pain is an output from the brain, it's not like the idea is people are like, I'm not imagining it. It's not about imagining it. It's pain is your brain's opinion about data that it's receiving from your body. And it's influenced by many, many different things, like history and things that people have said, past experiences, etc. So when we kind of color someone's experience by, by expressing an idea that this bad thing could happen and that's what's interesting about a lot of the research that's come out, and I don't know, it's probably been out for a long time, but that I'm more familiar with in the last decade or so, is that a lot of the ideas that we had maybe just haven't held up as to what is good and what is bad and what is dangerous. And so an idea, and very kind of antithetical to anchor yoga, at least not really entirely, but like a lot of the things that I learned in Iyengar yoga, is that it's the body's capacity to handle forces that maybe trumps like the technique or how you're doing something, this positioning. Because it could be that ideal alignment that we're asking someone, if someone has habitually moved their body in a different way and their tissues have adapted to the loads, different loads, that when we move them in that ideal alignment, it might not feel good. You know what I mean? It might actually be that they actually don't have the capacity to be there very well, tolerate that stretch or that force. So I think that as a teacher, I try to encourage the increasing one's capacity, building tolerance for moving in different ways gradually. So we're not like suddenly, taking like way into valgus, like extreme, with a lot of load and velocity. It's not that. But there are, like I dance a lot and I train my body to be able to go into classes with 20-year-old professional dancers and like, my body feels great. And I think sometimes I'm like, I don't have their technique, but I do train. I'm like, I've prepared myself for this and I'm not a spring chicken, so I do spend more time on strength than I used to, for sure. And my body feels better for it. Now that could be because I believe that it's good. Like, I don't really know, or that it is good. But I like to I take care of myself by exposing myself rather than avoiding things. Do you know, like I think it goes to the idea of when we avoid something, we fear something and we avoid something, we're actually in a weird sort of way reducing our ability to tolerate that thing should life present that to us. So anything that's like, and I don't think it has to be, you have to decide what's meaningful for you. And that's the important thing, right? So dance is meaningful for me. I really enjoy it. I want to be able to do it as long as possible. And I would find a way to do it. I'm sure if I was in a wheelchair, I would find a way, because of course you can dance in a wheelchair. I've danced with people in wheelchairs and they're amazing. So, there's always a way. There's always a way. But I like what I'm doing now. My husband and I were doing a Lindy Hop performance. And last night, we have these rehearsals on Sunday night, which is really, like kind of crazy. But we're doing these things called air steps, So if you've ever seen Lindy Hop, this dance from the mid 20th century, like swing dance, but it's like kind of bouncy and fast. And there's like air steps, which are aerial type maneuvers. And we really enjoy doing those, and it's like, and so he's basically been inspired. So we started doing these air steps, and Tom did martial arts for a long time, but he's like, I've been lifting my kettlebells, because he has to like lift me and throw me around. And it inspired him to do that because it's an activity that's meaningful for us. And so he's preparing his body to do this thing that's meaningful for us. So whatever someone's like, maybe they like playing golf, maybe they like, I don't know, surfing. Like surfing is something that like you have to prepare your body to surf. So I think that like the idea is about optimism, movement optimism is like movement is a part of our life. It's like how we learn about our world along with play. It's meaningful. It's good for us on so many different levels. And engaging in meaningful movement activities, especially with other people, I think it's really powerful, but is so good for us on so many levels. So I would rather be that educator who facilitates helping someone continue to do the things they love to do, or do the thing they love to do better, or do the things they love to do in a way where they're deriving enjoyment and fulfillment from doing the thing, rather than being that person who says, no, don't do that. Don't do that thing you love, because you're going to get hurt, whatever. Because I just don't believe, and I don't know that and I know there's context, there's specifics, but I believe there is a way, that there's always a way. It goes back to that idea of how might we, how might we? Because people surprise you at what they're capable of. And I just I think that if there's going to be a no, that might be something that someone decides, that the risk reward benefit is such that the risk isn't greater than the reward, and they make a choice. And that's great. Like, I totally respect that. But if someone loves to do something, that, what a wonderful thing to help them be able to do the thing they love to do. So, rather than fearing and avoiding something, how can we expose and adapt progressively, in a gradual way, but in a way that allows for that person to continue to fulfill, to engage in activities that are fulfilling and meaningful for them. So yeah, that's what the movement optimism is to me. And I hope I was clear about nocebo, like that's clear for your listeners. Because I think, yeah, we've all, and like you said, are there times? Yes, but for me, absolutely 100%. I experience fear. And if it's like a movement thing, I move myself gradually towards that. I really do and it's so interesting when you take that step, like that thing that you were afraid to do, and then you do it, like whether it's like lifting that heavier weight or whatever thing is, and you've been preparing yourself. So some part of you is like, I think I could do it, but you're not sure. And you do it. It's so empowering. And then you're like, oh my God, I thought it was going to be so terrible and so heavy and so awful or whatever the thing is. And you do it. And and sometimes you're like, it's too heavy. I'm not ready yet, and that's okay too. But there is kind of nothing like that feeling when you do the thing that either you thought you couldn't do or you were afraid to do. And it ends up being such a different experience than what you imagined in that brain that's always running scenarios, right? Predictive processing. It's like, could be all these things. And it runs through all those bad things. I don't know how often it runs through. What if it worked out? Like mine will usually run through all the bad things. This is just funny.
Well, I think in some sense, we'll maybe always have limits. Those limits can be explored and expanded, but to come at things from a place of what if and optimism, rather than coming at things from a place of what could go wrong or what will go wrong, and it's very simple in a lot of ways, but also, as I'm sure we all know, not that easy. But
no.
I think to be able to encourage people to have that optimism is is a wonderful thing. And I have to say, I feel more optimistic and inspired from getting the opportunity to listen to you speak for the last little while. And I guess just to finish up our conversation, for anybody who is coming to your workshops that we're hosting here or thinking about it, I'm sure we'll have a lot more interest after being able to put out this conversation, but maybe give people a little idea of what to expect.
So I think there will be structure. I'll tell you what to do. But there's going to be room for everyone to learn within that. Like and I'm learning too, it's always every situation, every environment we find each other in, it's a different context. So there's this emergence of what happens in a workshop depending on, the room and the people and the props available and all those things that kind of make it fun, I think. But we'll have fun. Like, I do think that people will have fun. I hope that they find it refreshing, that maybe there's a shift in perspective that they have, if not in the practice, then of themselves, that we might do some things that don't normally happen in a yoga room. And we'll do some things that happen in a yoga room, So, and that I try to create an environment where I encourage play and exploration within the structure. So there is a structure. We'll explore some yoga asana in novel ways. We'll explore our nervous system. We'll look at some, like motor learning, because when we're learning asana or like, I think any movement, whether it's breathing, whatever, like it's everything we do involves movement. Thinking is a movement, if you will. So I think they will hopefully have a novel experience, maybe just something that they didn't expect. And if they want to have maybe a little insight into what I do, you can check out my social media. Although I post certain things because, social media, you kind of know what you don't really ever know what the algorithm likes, but I take little snippets of stuff. And I think that a lot of the stuff that I teach might not be something that people would be terribly interested on social media, but I think that's where a lot of the juice is. And there's, everyone, my idea is that to try to make things possible, like, and instill a sense of possibility. Because I do believe, like I said, that there is a way, like we mentioned limitations. It's like, those are opportunities. Like so if you don't take this river, there's another one. There's another freaking pathway. Like, so, and how wonderful it is to realize that you're not stuck, that you don't have only that one road to go on, that there are many roads to the same, like, well, maybe we'll all arrive in Camden, but how we get there, will be different. And we can, it's like that time when you take that different path to work, or you go somewhere familiar, but you go a different way, and it's your city, and you think you know your city, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, like surprises along the way. Like, I never walked down, I'm never over here on, Lexington Avenue or whatever. I live on the west side of New York. So when I go over the east side, I'm like, oh, it's like so different over here. So yeah, so we're in the same city, we're going to the same kind of similar place, but when we take different routes, we have new experiences, and that can be really enlivening and invigorating for our brain, as well as our body, mind is one thing. And novel experiences are refreshing, I think. And there will be familiar too. So if you're one of those people that's like, I don't like anything new, there will be familiar things to ground us. Yeah.
Well, I'm very excited. I'm definitely going to be attending some, if not all, of the workshops myself. And as I said at the beginning, you really are a breath of fresh air. It's so lovely to hear someone speak so enthusiastically about something so possible and the potential of just giving people this new perspective. And yeah, we're honored to get the chance to host you here. So thank you again so much for taking the time. It really was a pleasure and an honor to be able to have this conversation and to listen to you speak so beautifully about these things. And yeah, we're very much looking forward to having you here soon.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to it too. So I will see you in April.